Glenn, thanks for joining us here down in Texas at the SDTS meeting.
Great to be here,
Yeah,
Joe.
yeah,
First trip.
For a lot of people.
2021,
Yeah,
so,
for you. Is this your first one?
And it was my last one last year, too.
I think it was a lot of people's last one last
Yeah.
year. People were changing flights on the last day of the session to make sure that they got out.
Right.
I remember that. So it's interesting it's the first one back now that you remind me. Yeah, and that was March last year. It was the first week of March.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this show's been really well attended. And you and I were chatting before we went live that technology seems to be focusing now on the democratization, which we've heard now for a couple years. But how are you defining that democratization? Are we pushing it down to a level of competency that might not fall into the surgeon's hands?
You know, I think there's two ways to look at democratization. I mean, one is just another word people use often is access. So I think there's a huge issue, particularly ex-US, about access to surgery. And so you've got, tremendous number of unmet need cases out there. And in a lot of emerging markets, it's because of you just don't have enough trained surgeons. Mm-hmm. So that is a huge need where technology can solve a lot of problems. But it can, within the developed markets too, mean that you could have a lower skilled person complete a procedure with technology that enables them to do it while maintaining quality levels. Mm-hmm. And that's a bit more controversial, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're breaking some of the traditional roles and boundaries. I mentioned in my panel yesterday, for years, we've built up, technology has actually driven specialization because technology is complicated. And as we've learned more about cellular behavior and genetics and all that, we've needed specialists to be able to operate all the technology that helps us do that. But we're at this precipice now where technology is driving simplification. And I think that that's a powerful trend, but it now challenges a lot of the structure that we have in the healthcare system.
And that was where I was going to ask my next question is I tend to agree with you. The technologies that we're working on are allowing access, remote access, sort of mentoring, telementoring, of course.
Yep.
But it's still ending up in the top end of the distribution curve,
right.
Expertise's hand, making him or her better.
Right, and that's not scalable.
Right.
And in addition, if you look at where, at least my hypothesis would be that the vast majority of the surgical robots, for instance, that are installed today are in your top tier medical centers and healthcare systems that have the access to capital. And chances are those systems already have some of the top performing surgeons with the best outcomes. So you're helping the best people do their jobs better, which is great, and there's always room to improve that. But the real opportunity is to help those who have less training, who do those procedures much less frequently, in a much more distributed environment, to be able to do things with good outcomes.
Mm. And I led a panel this morning on ambulatory surgical centers and sort of the death of the hospital. And I don't view it as the death of the hospital. We certainly need our hospitals because we have really sick people. The focus, though, was the distribution of centers of care need to spread out.
Yeah.
And that informs then a hub and spoke mentality on some of these remote technologies. So if you take somebody, you and I obviously know Corindus, which is now a Siemens property, right? That telestroke therapeutic where you could have work teams now distributed amongst the landscape and have somebody at Mount Sinai talking to potentially 4 to 6 different surgical stroke centers where you have a patient come in.
Right.
And now you are increasing access via technology. And so that's an interesting, I hope, indexing of technology and investment where we're not just making the average surgeons better and the great surgeons, a little better, getting and pushing out that distribution of sort of therapeutics, diagnostics more to the masses.
Yeah.
In a smaller focus factory center of care is where I think people are starting to get a sense that tech needs to be developed.
Absolutely, and there's plenty of routine care that goes on, but there's always these exceptional cases. You've heard a lot of people in the last day talk about, what makes or breaks is how a surgeon handles a complication that goes on, for instance. So you're always going to have the need for those experts, and being able to scale that expertise across a broad array of locations better is a huge opportunity for our healthcare system. But all that said, there's also an opportunity to get the more routinized care done systematically at the same time too.
That's right, and so I think the number's 18% of our GDP is what we're spending on healthcare these days, and 80% of that is sort of chronic care.
Yeah.
And thoughts on how we're trying now to push that care to the, again, ambulatory surgical centers, sort of outpatient, and then finally in the home connectivity. We're starting to see more of that.
It's a huge and I think really exciting trend. And frankly, I think this is the biggest opportunity for the med tech industry in my career. Because as you're decentralizing care, you're opening up many more locations for medical technology. And obviously the most diversified and the highest volume is going to be the home. So huge opportunity there. Of course, it's not a developed market. There's a lot of risk in terms of how you go after that. But I think that the companies who position to enable care in those types of locations are really going to have a tremendous growth opportunity in front of them. We've done some research just for the U.S. market to look at how site of care shifts are taking place. And of course, from hospital surgery center to an ASC or an OBL is a well-established trend, and more procedures, as we talked about this morning, are being shifted in that regard. But the really exciting trend is the hospital at home, so caring for tertiary level patients at home, and getting kind of the trifecta of wins, right? Getting better outcomes, lower cost, and higher patient satisfaction, patient and family satisfaction, I would say too, right? And that's really exciting. Then on top of all that, you've got the trend around retail health too, and so much of care that's going to be moving into that retail setting. And what they say that 95% or something like that of Americans live within 15 minutes of one of the big retail chains, and that's why so many of them are going after retail-based healthcare too, and I think that's an exciting trend as well.
Yeah, that mixed with the passive patient monitoring that we can put on board these days.
Yeah. I
personally believe that we will have a category come out in the next few years beside a 510K and a PMA. I think there will be consumerized medical type products that will have a rating on them that say not quite medical grade, but pretty darn good for data that may inform us as to whether it's a BMI issue, a heart rate issue, and you can buy something like that over the counter, and with that, potentially aggregate 4 or 5 biometric data points in your home that would feed to another service that gets imagined, because we've got to offload trying to get people to access points, meaning sites of care, and then finally loading down the system, because we're just even running shorter on doctors year in, year out.
Yeah, and I think the key to all that is going to be then layering on an intelligence and a collection system, so that the physician doesn't have to sort through all the data, right? That there's an alert system built in, so that healthcare professionals get fed only the appropriate bits of information that are generated from all these bits of consumer technology, which is the key. What I'm intrigued about too around this whole trend is how much of it is going to be wearable kind of devices versus potentially some combination with implantable devices as well. So, grain, I'm sure you know this trend as much as I do, but grain of rice
subcutaneous,
subcutaneous devices that measure other biometric indicators that a wearable may not be able to. Maybe they can eventually, but at this point they probably can't So what's the right combo there? And that presents a great opportunity for medical technology companies as well.
Yeah, I agree. And you'll get by the tinfoil hat people on the tracking and for nefarious reasons. But yeah, I think Kohler now has a medical device division they're just kicking off. This is public knowledge, so I'm not sort of revealing anything that we're working with that will inspect, your urine and bowel movements with biometrics and provide information.
Yeah.
And then you start to manage sleep health with passive monitoring underneath the mattress. And then you have a sub-Q implant that maybe monitors a few others. And again, sends that, informs, and can sort of escalate or manage that front end where you got your 23andMe predisposed for. And now you can start raising flags if you're predisposed for certain sort of genetically lifestyle. What is it? Genetics loads the gun, lifestyle fires it.
Oh,
so
there you go. Yep.
So we cover that.
Yeah.
What did you see while you were here over the last few days that either surprised you, other than handshaking and hugging, or mindset in the audience?
I don't think I had a lot of surprises, honestly. Some of the themes that came up in your panel this morning reinforced for me how challenging it is to change the healthcare system nonetheless. But I don't think that should stop us from trying. And much like we see a lot of consumer tech changing the game by building something that the consumer never thought they really wanted or needed, we are seeing that happen in healthcare too, and that same consumer pull is going to continue. And whether that consumer is a patient or a physician, the physician's a consumer too, and so they set their expectations based on their shopping experience and their banking experience, and they want that same type of experience in healthcare. And so they're pulling for this type of insight and control that technology allows, and I think we'll continue to see that shift. But, fundamentally, it pains to hear some of the frustration around reimbursement and what have you, because that is slow to catch up. But I was just really pleased to see all the wonderful technology that is truly driving cost effectiveness, quality, access, both the intellectual aspect of making good decisions in a surgical procedure and the tactical aspect of the skills and improving the skills. As somebody said, some are born with great skills, and again, the genetic analogy, and some aren't. Technology can help with that, and I love seeing those common themes across the sessions.
What I've seen too over the last few years, and you and I have been in this industry each for 3 decades plus, and forever we tracked IDE, PMA, 510K from a device perspective, and those were going to influence healthcare. I am really watching closely this telehealth market and the connectivity market that falls outside FDA oversight, if you will, that will create an aggregated connected information for patients. And you're going to see large investments in there, either from telecom companies entering this space. So people keep talking about Amazon and Apple and Google. I think the biggest threat out of there to the current standard is Amazon, because they understand scalability and process. But I would keep my eyes on the telecom players for companies like Proximy and others, because that is a telecom play before it's a telehealth play. If the telecom business wants to get into this industry as a delivery system for every other digital asset that gets delivered to the home, separate sites of care in the hospital, and on the individual connected via Bluetooth or wireless,
Right.
That's a substantial sort of per click use that I'm keeping my eyes on. Thoughts in that area?
Well, I would just add 5G, the trend around 5G, that could have a huge impact. So just the enablement of connecting multiple devices without the need for Wi-Fi, which really then you layer on the trends around a more distributed environment, that becomes a really powerful telecom-based enabler for innovation in our industry. And so I'm excited to see, you know, how we can take advantage of that, not only in terms of the virtual engagement, but digital engagement. So let me step back and say I think the way we're triaging healthcare in the future is digital, virtual, and then physical, right? So digital being that layer of engaging with an algorithm first, and then the virtual of communicating with an individual next. That whole transformation is going to really be enabled by telecom, to your point.
And that feels sensible, right? Because if you just take that pyramid and turn it upside down, you can scale that then.
Yeah.
And that answers where we started this conversation with, is access.
Yeah.
Right, which is the number one. I think access is more important than cost, because if you can provide access, you can head off catastrophic therapies at a later date, especially in our country. So if you can go ahead and create a higher rate of access and then leverage that through technology, you ultimately can impact that chronic healthcare issue that's really sinking the ship right now.
Absolutely, and it ties into health equity as well. And health equity is such an important issue for our country to tackle. And again, you know, to the degree that we can have technologies that don't require the patient or the consumer to have a wireless network in their home and have embedded communications capability like 5G, then that enables us to be able to really monitor, help, assist those who don't have the means as much, and that's going to be a key to unlocking a lot of our health issues as a society.
I'm hoping that healthcare continues to pursue a conscientious, capitalistic mindset.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Well, it's always good seeing you, my friend.
Great to see you, Joe.
Thank you.
Great. See you next year.
It's live from Houston. Well, sort of live. This is live here. Joe Mullings, SDTS. Be well.